So we're in the state in the Polkadot ecosystem where a large portion of the liquidity and assets in the Polkadot ecosystem are not actually secured by Polkadot itself. That's kind of the problem that Snowbridge is set out to solve.
That's a huge development. You guys going live. It's been highly expected, anticipated for a long time.
We put out a governance proposal at the beginning of last year. We've been building since then, and we're at the stage now where we are ready to go live. By the time this podcast goes out, it's likely we'll be live then. Excited to have it finally out after many years and to have people being able to use it and see the Polkadot ecosystem get almost upgraded with some of the new capabilities that I think our bridge brings to the table.
You got the showcase prepared as well, which is really cool because I haven't seen it yet. Maybe no one has. First.
Yeah, it could be one of the first places that's been released.
All right, thank you for tuning into the Teach Me DeFi podcast. Today, I'm here with Aiden from Snowbridge, a highly anticipated project on Polkadot. Hi, mate.
Hey, so great to meet you and excited to chat about the bridge.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard Snowbridge for a while, and I think a lot of people sort of in the Polkadot ecosystem have as well. And I think things are getting a bit more concrete at the moment, and we have some exciting stuff to talk about. So it's a great time for this podcast, I'd say. Perhaps, can you just give us an overview, how did it all start and when did it all start? Because it's been around for so long, that name. I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's been a few years now. So maybe a bit of background. So for myself, I was working on distributed systems and crypto blockchain related stuff for many years. And I had initially been consulting and freelancing on projects related to infrastructure. I worked on Cosmos Bridge a few years ago and a bunch of Ethereum interoperability. And probably about three and a half years ago, maybe even 4 years now, the Polkadot kind of community put up a request for proposals around an Ethereum bridge. And that it's at the time I was working on bridging, and I'd also started a kind of company, Snowfork, where we had a collection of great engineers and product managers that are working together, working for different teams on different things. And so we'd already got an experience with bridging. We thought this would be a really cool project to do. And so we put together a proposal to build out an initial bridge. At this time, this was when Ethereum was still proof of work. So it was quite a different project to where it's come today. But we built out an initial proof of work based bridge where we got a small grant from the Web3 Foundation for building that. And pretty much at the time we were ready to go live was around the same time that Ethereum was moving over to proof of stake. And so similarly, we were working on this protocol called Beefy, which is a protocol that Parity and Web3 have been working on now also for many years, which is a key component of our bridge, which makes it stand out from other bridges. And so that was also a protocol that took a lot longer than expected for Parity to release. And so we ended up having to kind of go into a second phase of the project where we built out a new proof of stake based bridge. And so we put out a governance proposal for kind of follow-on funding at the beginning of last year, I think it was, for this current phase of the bridge. And we've been building since then, and we're at the stage now where we're pretty much ready to go live. By the time this podcast goes out and people are listening, it's likely we'll be live then. And so, yeah, excited to have it finally out after many years and to have people being able to use it and see the Polkadot ecosystem get almost upgraded with some of the new capabilities that I think our bridge brings to the table.
That's lovely. So you basically, did I get that right? You kind of started out with bridging and Cosmos first. Is that right?
I was kind of freelancing and consulting at the time, and I
right.
Was involved in a few projects here and there. There was one kind of early prototype of a Cosmos bridge that I worked on as a freelancer. I think it was the first bridge between Cosmos and Ethereum. It was based on a kind of Wormhole style multi-sig bridge. And it was a proof of concept. I think it was some of the initial building blocks that were then forked and reused for some of the early Cosmos bridges.
Okay, super interesting. Yeah, and I believe you might have a showcase later on as well. So I'm excited about that. Yeah, I mean, maybe if we kick it off to kind of get all viewers on the same page. I think bridges are pretty misunderstood in many ways for a lot of people. So maybe we can try to kind of like talk about the concept of trust with bridges and trustlessness. I believe that's a big thing with Snowbridge. Can you give like just like an overview of the different bridge systems, so to say, and the trust assumptions and what they mean for users, and how Snowbridge fits into that?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's definitely an important thing for people to think about and understand, in terms of like understanding why Snowbridge is an important and valuable project. And so maybe like we can take a step back and think about it at a high level of like what is trust in the blockchain world, and like why do we care about blockchains? And I think like the main reason is that we still have to trust something, whether it's a certain set of people or a code implementation. But the distinction that blockchains give us is that we usually are trusting a consensus system where there's a large group of people involved, none of which are critical to the functioning of the system, and where it's unlikely that any of them can manipulate us, censor us, commit fraud, because there requires consensus amongst a large group of people, and there's a protocol that's implemented with a lot of theory involved and a lot of maths involved, a lot of computer science involved to create a level of security that we hope doesn't have any bugs in it and protects us, and so there's an element of trust in that system and in that technology as well. And so when we think about coming to bridges and interoperability, what they really do is they connect multiple of these different kinds of trust systems together. And so when you're bridging between two systems, you're already almost having to take on additional trust assumptions that you didn't have before. If you're just using Ethereum or just using Polkadot, then you're only trusting Ethereum or only trusting Polkadot. So that means in, say, Polkadot's case, you're trusting the existing validator set, not necessarily every individual validator, but the aggregated assumptions across all of them, that 2/3 majority or around that amount are going to be secure. You're trusting the protocol and the protocol design of Polkadot's consensus, so that's like Grandpa consensus, and Babe and so on. You're trusting the code, the implementation. So you're trusting that on GitHub the Git repo and in the Polkadot and Substrate and Cumulus integrations have been written correctly, and there aren't any like game-changing bugs. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, you're trusting the kind of social consensus around all of these different parties, whether it's the developers, the validators, their communication channels, their governance processes for how they come to consensus and how they actually change things. Because often in all kinds of like technology systems, when things change is when there's a lot of risk. And so understanding the process for how things change is like a critical one when it comes to trust. And so that's all for just like a single blockchain. Now, if we were talking about a bridge between Ethereum and Polkadot, the best case scenario is one where you're trusting all of the stuff for Polkadot and you're trusting all of the stuff for Ethereum. In almost all cases, maybe even in all cases, a bridge is now an additional component that's part of the system. So there's like this additional new ecosystem or system of things to trust, depending on how the bridge is working. And different bridges are implemented in different ways. And so depending on how the bridge is implemented, it adds new things to the table that you need to trust all of these things in addition to what you're already trusting from Polkadot and Ethereum. And so the different bridges have different designs for what they add into the trust ecosystem. Our kind of philosophy and goal with Snowbridge is to try and add as little as possible and to try and keep the level of things that you need to trust just to be what you already have to trust when you're trusting Polkadot and Ethereum, and not add too much to that. And so that's kind of the high level philosophy and goal behind the project. In practice, what that means and like how it makes it, how it compares to other kinds of bridge models, we can maybe get into next. But that's how I like to think about it at like a high level.
Yeah, I love it. That's a good summary. And in terms of, if we would actually compare it now to all the different kinds of bridge implementations, because I mean, what viewers are probably for sure aware of is all the hacks and the money lost in these multi-sig bridges and all that. So yeah, can you just give us an overview of the different kinds and how Snowbridge fits into it?
Yeah, so maybe I can talk about, if there's other projects that come to mind from your side, feel free to bring them up, but I'll talk about like the different categories that I think are from my side. So the one category is like multi-sig based bridges. And to be honest, almost all bridges are actually multi-sig based bridges in some way. If you look at like Ethereum itself uses proof of stake, where there's a bunch of validators signing messages. Same Polkadot uses proof of stake, and so those, in a way, that's kind of like a multi-sig, where there's a bunch of participants that are signing messages for updating the blockchain itself. And so multi-sigs are almost like this underlying building block for all consensus systems. But when people use the term multi-sig bridges, they tend to refer to a much smaller group of individuals which have a lot more power, that are not constrained by a protocol in addition to the multi-sig. And so for multi-sig bridges, what comes to mind is like, I know, for example, Wormhole. I know they've evolved a lot to this day, but the initial implementation and the core of it was a multi-sig bridge where there were maybe 5 to 10 parties that were running the bridge. They had like a really strong, secure, trusted setup where they had high security computers in data centers with all the bells and whistles and checks to keep their private key secure. And then they're running software that signs messages to allow bridges to allow messages to go. And so they would deploy some piece of code to one chain like Ethereum, deploy another piece of code to Polkadot, which in Wormhole's case, I think they did it on Akala and then maybe on Moonbeam. They're not sure. So when it comes to kind of what is introduced to that trust model that we talked about before, there's a few things. One is they're deploying new code to the chain. So there's like new code on Polkadot, new code on Ethereum. You obviously need to trust that code works and that it's not buggy. Then there's these like 5 to 10 individuals that have private keys which control the bridge itself, and so you need to trust those individuals and trust that they won't collude or to either censor or commit fraud. And then there's also this off-chain security system that they've got, where they've got private keys. They're stored in some computers in some data center somewhere, and there's some protocol that's not on chain, but that's involved storing and securing their keys and determining when their keys are used to sign messages. And so you need to trust all of those kinds of systems that exist off chain as well. And that's, I think, like the kind of generic architecture for how most what we call multi-sig bridges work. And so that's not necessarily like a bad thing. A lot of the time the participants in these bridges are doing a great job. They've got like high security data centers. They've got like really great protocols for securing their keys. But fundamentally, there are these existing like building blocks of the architecture that you need to trust in the multi-sig world.
Right. Okay, so there's also this off-chain component, obviously. So you are not doing it that way. Your solution works differently. So how is that possible? How does Snowbridge work? Yeah.
So I think it's worth maybe taking one step forward from the multi-sig world into, before we get to Snowbridge, other kinds of bridges. So another category of bridges is things like Axelar comes to mind as an example, where there's like this third blockchain that's responsible for securing the bridge. And in a project like that, it's similar to how we were talking about all blockchains are kind of like multi-sigs in a way. If you think about a brand new blockchain like Axelar, it's also got a validator set that's running a protocol, and those validators are also some set of participants. I'm not sure how many validators Axelar has. Maybe it's 50 or 100 or whatever it is. But essentially, there's this new blockchain which comes with all of those same considerations around multi-sigs of trusting the participants, as well as a protocol that constrains those participants to potentially decrease the risk of some of them having issues. But it also introduces an additional new set of protocols for the blockchain itself, and it's like consensus, it's proof of stake for that you need to trust. And in Axelar's case, I believe they have a token, and so there's also dynamics around the token and whether the token is secure. For example, if it's a proof of stake token, then depending on who holds the token, you need to trust that 66% or whatever it is of the token holders are not malicious, and also who can control the inflation and the minting of that token. So the governance process around like the change of the token becomes another point of trust there. But I'd say that is kind of quite a different model to what people traditionally think of as multi-sig bridges, because it introduces a lot more constraints onto what the kind of validators can do, because they're conforming to this blockchain protocol. And maybe the third category is that people like to talk about is like client-based bridges. And so that's the category that Snowbridge falls into, where instead of using like a validator set that's different from the underlying blockchains, in the case of like a multi-sig like Wormhole, it's their foundation and their participants that are running the project. In the case of Axelar, it's the actual validators on Axelar's chain. Whereas in the case of light client-based bridges like Snowbridge, we try and keep the validator set just to the existing Polkadot and Ethereum validators and not introduce any new parties into the mix. And the way in which we do that is by having code that's deployed on both chains that can actually run the underlying consensus protocol with a light client. So, for example, in our case, we've got code that's deployed to Polkadot that can verify Ethereum's consensus. And so we can use the exact same signatures that the native Ethereum validators are creating as part of their proof of stake to verify the progress of Ethereum. So we don't need to introduce any kind of additional third party into the mix beyond those existing Ethereum validator sets. The same applies in reverse in our case, where the existing Polkadot validators, they all produce the signatures for Snowbridge as opposed to any additional third parties.
Okay, so you kind of so you're reducing trust assumptions. You say we're not gonna have another blockchain in the middle which we have to trust again. We're gonna keep it to the validators of Polkadot and Ethereum and try to work with that.
Exactly. And so there is kind of when you think about different levels of trust, the most important ones in, I think, the blockchain order, like the validators and the security of their keys, as well as the code and like the implementation of the protocol. And in all of these bridges, they're adding new code and new infrastructure. For example, in the multi-sig case, it's a little bit of on-chain code, but it's a lot of off-chain code. In the case of something like Axelar, it's a lot of on-chain code for its new protocol and the validators of that protocol. And in Snowbridge's case, it's a lot of on-chain code for the light clients, but there's no off-chain code and no validators. And so there's a trade-off there. Where like our goal is really to reduce the kinds of things that you trust. And so we've removed this whole class of categories of things that you need to trust, specifically like third-party validators or third-party blockchains or third-party tokens. And so that whole category of things that you need to trust is removed. But you still have, the category of like, does the code work? Is the code got bugs in it? And so that's like a unavoidable kind of piece of trust that any, I think, bridge is still going to need to, have for users.
Right. And are there any other projects then that fit into the same category as you guys that have kind of tried to create a trustless bridge with light clients?
Yeah. So I think, trustless bridges with light clients have been a discussion in the blockchain world for a long time. I'd say that the kind of key case there that is like probably the best implementation is Cosmos itself, where, Cosmos uses IBC. And every Cosmos chain can talk to other Cosmos chains using light clients. And so the like native bridging in between different Cosmos chains is light client based bridging. There it's a lot easier for them to do that because they're bridging between the same architecture, the same chains, like two different Cosmos chains. They use the same technology, the same consensus usually. And so for them to implement a light client based bridging, it's symmetric, where on both sides they're running the same protocol and the same consensus. And so I think the Cosmos ecosystem was the first to have like true light client-based bridging between different blockchains because of that. Since then, we have seen some implementations of light client-based bridging between different ecosystems. I think there was initially a bridge between Rainbow and Ethereum. That was one of the first light client-based bridges where I believe messages, I think it was only one directional initially, messages from Rainbow to, I think, actually, I may be wrong, messages from Ethereum to Rainbow used a light client, but in the reverse direction, I think they used like an optimistic bridge design. And this was back when Ethereum was still proof of work, where they had that working. So maybe almost 3 years ago. And they used a similar design to what we had for our proof of work bridge before we decided to migrate to proof of stake. I think a lot of the bridging teams have been investigating like light clients more generally. I think I'm not up to date exactly with like where Wormhole's at, but I think their team was kind of investigating light clients at one point. I think for Axelar, they have developed light clients between Axelar and the chains. And so I think there's a light client between Axelar and Ethereum, or Axelar and Moonbeam. But it still goes through like the Axelar blockchain in the middle. And so light clients are kind of becoming a part of most bridging ecosystems now, in some form or shape, maybe not directly and maybe not like cleanly in the way that Snowbridge has implemented them just with the core underlying chains, but they're a key kind of mechanism now that I think are critical for all bridging. Maybe the other last one to mention is for layer twos. So if you look at like between Ethereum and Optimism, or Ethereum and Polygon, there are bridges that have a light client as part of their bridging process. I think Ethereum, there's also an interesting, like I think Ethereum itself has a light client that allows Ethereum to validate its own messages that someone has implemented, where within an Ethereum smart contract there's like an Ethereum light client. So maybe that's like a quick overview of the areas that come to mind from me of where light clients are used.
Right. And what is Snowbridge going to be for? What will this enable? Why is it important?
Yeah. So the thing about Snowbridge that makes it stand out is in understanding the purpose of Polkadot as an ecosystem. Polkadot was built as like a separate blockchain ecosystem from Ethereum because it's got different protocols and different consensus that work quite differently to Ethereum, and it has different trust assumptions, different governance, and different participants. Right, it's like a completely separate ecosystem. And the core purpose of like Polkadot is to have this relay chain with multiple different parachains, where there's this core relay chain that's providing security to all of these different parachains. And I think the fundamental purpose of the Polkadot relay chain is like a security chain where the dot token can also almost be reused, and not reused, but its security can be spread across different parachains that implement things in their own way, and want to have different consensus or different implementation, different applications. They all draw their security from this core relay chain of the dot token. And the challenge with bridging is when you're bridging assets across, those assets essentially keep the security of wherever they float. So assets that have come through Wormhole, no matter where they go in the Polkadot ecosystem, those assets still have that trust in Wormhole embedded in them. Similarly, like assets, say, coming from Axelar, they have that trust in Axelar embedded in them. So even when and let's say the existing Polkadot ecosystem already has bridges. It already has you can bridge from Ethereum through Moonbeam and then go into Hydra. And deposit your liquidity there. But those assets, they've gone through all of those steps along the way, and in each of those steps, more trust assumptions get added. And so when I'm using like say kind of wrapped Ethereum on Moonbeam or on Hydra today, that's gone through Hydra gone through Axelar or Wormhole. In order for those assets to stay secure, Wormhole or Axelar, whichever bridge it went through, becomes a critical piece of trust. And this is almost like a kind of counter the ethos of Polkadot, in my opinion, where you want the trust to come from the relay chain in Polkadot. So if we look at like say liquidity on, I don't know how much there is there. I'm sure there's a few million of like Ethereum that's there. Even though Hydra is like a Polkadot parachain, it's getting its security from the dot token and from like dot's consensus. If there's millions of dollars of assets that are in liquidity pools there that have come from bridges, then actually the like security is also coming from those bridges and coming from Wormhole. And the nature of security is that you almost get the security of your weakest link. And so if there's like a weak link somewhere in all of those trust systems, then the security of those assets are already kind of degraded to the weakest link there. So not to say that there's like a security issue with any of these existing systems, but it does kind of degrade the trust to the weakest link in those systems. So if you look at, say, like the liquidity pools on Hydra between Ethereum and DOT, even though they're secured by Polkadot itself and like the Polkadot relay chain, they're also secured by Wormhole. And so the strength of those assets is degraded to the strength of the bridges rather than kind of Polkadot's relay chain. And so for me, it feels like that almost undermines the purpose of Polkadot security as a whole, because it's losing all of those like benefits that you get from Polkadot's relay chain and the DOT token in those cases due to that. So we're in the state in the Polkadot ecosystem where a large portion of the liquidity and assets in the Polkadot ecosystem are not actually secured by Polkadot itself, and so lose out on the benefits of Polkadot as a technology and as a blockchain. And so that's kind of the problem that Snowbridge is set out to solve. And so our goal there is really to have a bridge where you don't need to trust an additional system. And so we go directly from Ethereum to Polkadot. Our bridge doesn't introduce any kind of additional governance. It doesn't introduce any kind of additional token. It doesn't introduce any kind of third-party validators. So assets that flow through Snowbridge and that land on Ethereum, land on Polkadot, will be secured entirely by Polkadot itself and by, of course, Ethereum, because you have to trust Ethereum when you're bridging Ethereum over. And so what that means is that the security of these assets are now only constrained by the security of Polkadot and Ethereum and no additional systems. And so the kind of things that you need to trust for assets on Snowbridge are a more limited set of components. And so we believe that that's more kind of aligned with the goals of Polkadot and like the relay chain as a technology and is almost like a necessary piece in order for Polkadot to maintain its goal of having like a hub and relay chain based security.
Right. And can you give us an idea of because the Snowbridge would be, I think, built on the Bridge Hub parachain, right? On Polkadot, so dedicated parachain for bridges, I believe. So and then like what would perhaps like the infrastructure and maybe the use cases look like? I read in your docs, for example, parachains will be able to send XCM instructions to Bridge Hub to use the bridge. Like how will they be able to leverage this? How will it improve kind of user experience getting into Polkadot and having interoperability perhaps and things like that?
Yeah, so maybe let's talk about Bridge Hub and Asset Hub, because those are key pieces of our architecture. So maybe a year or two ago, I think the Polkadot community realized that they want to move functionality off of the relay chain onto kind of parachains and to keep the relay chain really focused on consensus and security. And so I think the first kind of public good parachain to launch was Asset Hub, where it's like a parachain that's running under the Polkadot consensus. It doesn't have its own token. It doesn't have its own kind of consensus protocol. And for any kinds of proposals and upgrades and changes to Asset Hub, it goes through the main Polkadot consensus. And so it's almost like a piece of Polkadot itself, even though it runs on a separate parachain. And the idea there was to create a separate parachain for all stuff related to creating assets and registering new assets. And so similarly, Bridge Hub is this new parachain that's been launched recently. That's the same kind of thing, but for bridging. And so Bridge Hub is like this hub parachain that's going to have bridges to lots of different places. It's initially launching with Snowbridge for the bridge to Ethereum and the Kusama bridge for the bridge to Kusama. But it's got those same properties where it doesn't have its own token. It doesn't have its own consensus system or own governance. Everything goes through the main relay chain governance. And so it's almost like a native public good piece of Polkadot itself. And so So Snowbridge is launching on Bridge Hub. And so when to think about the architecture of how assets flow, essentially we're using Bridge Hub and Asset Hub as our core components. So Bridge Hub is used for the underlying bridge protocol, where there's like a message layer that supports arbitrary messages between Ethereum and Polkadot, whether that's for asset transfer or for other kinds of functionality or other kinds of cross-chain applications. And then there's Asset Hub for the registration and creation of assets. So when we, for example, send ETH or ERC20 tokens across to the Polkadot ecosystem, they get registered, and like the main chain where they're created is on Asset Hub. It's not required. I think other parachains, if they want to do their own thing and implement a different system where they don't use Asset Hub, that's also going to be supported. But that's the kind of the default person that's just using Ethereum assets on Polkadot is going to have those assets registered in Asset Hub. And so when you're bridging as an end user from Ethereum to Polkadot, you would say send your assets, whether it's ETH or ERC20 tokens, to a contract on Ethereum where they get locked up. And then that triggers a message to get sent and verified through our light clients on BridgeHub. BridgeHub handles the message verification and the consensus related stuff. And then the message goes and flows through to Asset Hub where the assets are actually created. And so you'll get like a representative version of Ethereum or any ERC20 token that you sent that's on Asset Hub. And the nice thing about that is that almost all parachains today already have open channels with Asset Hub. And so from there, you'll be able to send your assets to any parachain in the Polkadot ecosystem that's connected to Asset Hub. And that's the basic level of how things work. We can go into more like extended functionality and more kinds of features that will be supported. But maybe I'll pause there to see if that makes sense and if you have any kind of questions about that.
Yeah, that's fair enough. It's good. It's good to take pauses and touch base. Perhaps one follow-up question. If it ends up in Asset Hub, sort of, I imagine in most cases you want to go to probably some other parachain and not Asset Hub. Maybe that'll change. Maybe there'll be interesting things to do in Asset Hub. I don't know. So will it then be possible for users to just be like, okay, I'm right now on Ethereum. All right, I want to bridge to Moonbeam and I want to do that through Snowbridge. And then is this possible? And is this like a one-click type of thing?
Yeah, so we have been kind of experimenting with different models for this because different parachains use different fee tokens. So for example, Moonbeam, maybe they want the Moonbeam token to be paid as fees for processing on their parachain. Hydra expects people to have the Hydra token for processing as fees on their parachain. And so when you're kind of doing one-click transfers to different parachains, you need to handle, okay, what's going to happen with the fees? And there's different ways to do it. Maybe we send DOT through across and the parachains support DOT. And then fees can be paid in DOT. Maybe we ask the parachains, hey, are you willing to accept actually Ethereum as the fee on your parachain? Or if someone's sending, say, DAI, an ERC20 token across, are you willing to accept DAI as the fee on your parachain? Maybe we can do an exchange. Like Asset Hub is going to have a very basic DEX for exchange for fees. So that if someone's sending, say, Ethereum across, but they wanted to end up on Moonbeam and they need some Moonbeam tokens, then a little bit gets converted. Maybe the user user's already got a Moonbeam account, and so some of their own Moonbeam can be used. And so there's a lot of these options when it comes to fees. And we're busy discussing with different parachains what like options work the best for them and their users. So I think at day one launch, it's going to require 2 transactions. The first one to send it to Asset Hub, and then the second one to send it wherever else you want. But we are kind of exploring with parachains what's the best model for one hop, and we expect within a few weeks we'll pick one and then enable the one that works there. But the initial UX, I think, the goal is really the thing is once things get onto Asset Hub, and the unique thing about maybe Snowbridge as opposed to the other bridges that exist in the Polkadot ecosystem is we're built to be XCM native, and so what that means is. All of our assets fit into the existing XCM language, and when assets are created and communicated across parachains, they use XCM, and so that means that across all of the parachains, they have mostly already got good support for XCM and the latest version of XCM v3, and so as soon as we get to Asset Hub with that initial transaction, then we can do all of the kinds of superpowered things that XCM can do with like multi-hop, multi-application use cases of assets that we can already see in the Polkadot ecosystem. So, for example, I think a few months ago, there was this interesting governance proposal where for paying parity developers, they had this like complex XCM instruction, which first like got some assets out of the Polkadot treasury, then sent it to Hydra, then transferred it into like USDC because people want to get paid in fiat currency, and then transferred it over to people's accounts. And that was all done through like a kind of fairly complex XCM instruction program. And because all Snowbridge assets are kind of XCM native, we'll be able to have kind of any arbitrarily complex XCM instructions run with them as well.
Right. That's
but yeah, to kind of simplify things and go back to your question, yeah, the initial UX will be kind of 2 hop transactions, and then I think soon after we'll have 1 hop implemented.
Right. Okay. Okay. That's good. I mean, the easier it is, the better. But yeah, I hear you on the gas fee issue, because maybe you're bridging over a token that, because the different solutions have different consequences, right? Because like maybe you're bridging over a token that is not like ETH, so it's not like a major token. So you might not have deep liquidity on Asset Hub to do that exchange that you
Exactly.
mentioned. So perhaps it would be easier to just be like, okay, parachains, if you want this to be easy, maybe accept DOT as a fee token. So you can pay
Yeah.
gas fees in DOT, and then you can just send a little bit of DOT over as well.
Exactly. The other challenge has been there's been recent debate in the Polkadot ecosystem around where like the core chain for DOT should be, and I think most parachains today they only really accept the relay chain as the reserve for DOT, but there's a lot of push from Parity and various teams to actually move to Asset Hub as the main reserve for DOT, and so that kind of creates a question for parachain teams, because when DOT is sent from the relay chain to a parachain like Hydra versus when DOT is sent from Asset Hub to a parachain like Hydra. Hydra needs to manage two different kind of accounting systems now. Where for example, if I've sent 5 DOT from the relay chain and then I send it to you on Hydra, and then Hydra wants to send it back to you on Asset Hub. There's a bit of an accounting question here, because the DOT was originally like stored as a reserve on the relay chain as opposed to on Asset Hub. And so parachains need to decide how they want to manage this. And there's some debate in the Polkadot community where, there's different options. Some parachains think, no, we should just use the relay chain and keep things as is. Some parachains think we should just move over to Asset Hub and keep everyone on Asset Hub. Some parachains think, oh, no, we should keep both and just have some code that handles this accounting. And that also is relevant for Snowbridge, because we also have to choose, okay, when we're sending our message across to a parachain like Hydra, if we're sending it through Asset Hub, then we're sending the DOT from Asset Hub, versus if we're sending it through the relay chain, then we're sending the DOT through the relay chain. And so we're also kind of discussing with parachains what is the best way to kind of find kind of a standard on this before we pick it ourselves.
Right, that's really interesting. So and I believe you got the showcase prepared as well, which is really cool, because I haven't seen it yet. Maybe no one has, so that would be a first.
Yeah, it could be the kind of one of the first places that the showcase is being released. And so maybe to introduce it, let's talk about the UX for Snowbridge. And like the UI actually. So we have a UI that we've built that we hope people will use for sending tokens across from Ethereum to Polkadot and back. But I think an important thing for us to keep in mind is we believe that the best UX is for applications themselves to actually integrate the interface. So when you're trading on Hydra, you don't have to go to a separate website to bridge your tokens. You really ideally want to click a few buttons on Hydra's webpage to do all the bridging. And so we've developed both of these capabilities. We've developed like a custom JavaScript SDK that we hope other parachain teams and applications will integrate into the UI. Similarly, we're hoping wallets themselves will integrate it, so you can just like within your wallet do the transfers across blockchains. But of course, it's going to take time for those integrations to happen. And people also want to have just like some people, they want a bridging website. They're familiar with bridging websites. Most bridges have a bridging website. And so we've got a bridge website up that people can use for bridging, irrespective of whatever application they actually want to use. And so, I can share my screen and show off the showcase and show just how the process of using our UI for bridging across will work.
Cool. So this is a recording of the Snowbridge app. It's at app.snowbridge.network. You can see here's the main page, and we can see the bridge status is normal at the top, which if we hover over, we can see some more stats. And if you go to the status page, you see some more there, and we'll be adding more details here for like lower level details that people are interested in that. This page does take a while to load because it queries a lot of data from both chains. So it may take 10, 20 seconds on some computers, depending on your internet connection. Then you've got the history page, which shows a history of, currently it's set to all global transfers, the whole bridge. But then when you go and log in, it will be for just your own transfers. So to kind of get started and log in, you can go to wallets. Let's say I want to do a transfer and connect my Ethereum wallet. And so I'm about to connect it. And there we go. And similarly, you can go to wallets and connect your Polkadot wallet. And I'm using Talisman, so I'm going to connect that. And then select the account. And so on the screen, I can select the source between Ethereum and Asset Hub and destination. We're going to be adding more chains in time. It does technically support all chains, but we're being careful about how we add support to ensure that everything's tested well beforehand. And so probably next week, some more chains will be added. So I'm going to do an initial test from Ethereum to Asset Hub. And from my Ethereum address here, I'm going to pick my beneficiary and pick an amount. I'll just go with a small amount now of 0.01 wrapped ETH. Similarly, we're going to be adding more assets here over the coming week as we register more tokens. Token registration is permissionless. Anyone can do it. But on the user interface, we are going to slowly add more. But yeah, if you're willing to do stuff on chain through a different interface, you can register more tokens as you like. So I'm going to submit. We do a bunch of validation. It's important, for example, for you to have an existential deposit on Asset Hub. And so that's something that the UI will kind of detect and ensure that you don't send until you've done that. You can see here, the validation I'm missing here is I need to approve my ERC20 token. And so I'm going to click the fix button, and that's going to approve the token spend in my MetaMask. I'm going to confirm the transaction now. And I've just submitted it. It should be through in a few seconds. And then once that's done, then I'll be able to send a transaction, and that'll similarly be a single transaction to send the tokens across. We are going to work on having that approve and send happen in a single transaction soon. But yeah, I think Ethereum is running a little slow today. Gas prices are high, so I'm just going to increase my gas price once it's gone through. And I think it's through. So now I can go and submit. It's going to run the validation again to check that I'm able to go through all the steps. And it's sending. And I'm going to go ahead and confirm the transaction in my MetaMask. And now it's being submitted to Ethereum. Probably take a few seconds for that transaction to land. And once it's done, we'll see this screen update with the transaction going through. And then I'll be able to go and track it on my history page. Now, I get a pop-up with transfer successful. Sorry, the bottom of my screen is a little cut off. But then we can go to the status page, history page. And then here I can toggle between global transfers and my transfers. And so if I toggle off, then I'm seeing my own one, and we can see this kind of one that I just did, which is pending. And I can open it up and see details about the transaction. And then I can view the first step. It's been submitted to the Snowbridge gateway, which if I click there, it's going to open up on Etherscan, and I can see the Etherscan page. So we're going from Ethereum to Polkadot. The average wait time here, you can see to Polkadot is about 13 to 20 minutes. So come back in 15 minutes, and we should see this page update. And you can close the tab, you can come back and refresh whenever. And so yeah, I'm going to pause the recording here, and I'll come back in 20 minutes to show that completed. Similarly, if I wanted to go in the reverse direction, I can go here and select going from Asset Hub to Ethereum. And so now I'm going to be sending a transaction to Asset Hub to return some. So I already sent some in the past, so I don't need to wait because that's already organized. So I'm going to pick an amount, say 0.01 again. You can see the fee here, and I'm going to submit that. We have similar validations to check that you have enough fee to pay, and then I should see the transaction to send back come up in my wallet. So yeah, it just popped up in my Talisman wallet. I can see the fee and amount, and I'm going to approve it, and it's been approved. And so it should go through in a few seconds. And there we go. It's just the transfer successful just popped up at the bottom of my screen. Sorry, that's a bit cut off. And if I go to my history page, I'll see this one, that 0.01 wrapped ETH going back to Ethereum also showing up here. And I can see, if I open up the transaction, I can view it on Subscan. And there we go. And similarly, you can see the time to go from Polkadot to Ethereum is a bit longer. It can take between 1 and 4 hours, and that's something we're going to be tweaking over the coming weeks. But that's it. And so yeah, if I come check back here in 20 minutes or so, I'll see this first transaction completed. And if I come check back in an hour or two, I'll see the asset hub stuff completed. Actually, now we can just see 2 more steps got added, where the message has been queued to the asset hub channel, and it's been accepted by the asset hub channel. And so now it's just waiting for the light line to be ready to be submitted to Ethereum. Once it's fully completed, we'd see a 4th line show up here that links us to the Etherscan page for the actual Ethereum transaction that's been relayed. And yeah, that's it. And then on more, you can see the link to our GitHub, a link to our docs. And in our docs, you can see a lot more details about how the bridge works and lower level instructions. And yeah, that's it.
Hey there, just a quick message. If you're watching this and you're enjoying it, please make sure to tell a friend that might also like it, because we don't run any ads on this podcast, and that helps us out a lot to keep doing this. Thank you. Right, so you did mention what you can kind of expect on day one. It would be more of the 2-click, or 2 clicks, not the right word, maybe the bridging towards the asset hub, and then you got the token there, and then you can bring it to a parachain of your choosing. Is there anything else to talk about in terms of user experience? I think that could be interesting, and what that process looks like compared to other bridging protocols live today, because that's what users are used to, and that's the reference point. So, for example, how about latency? What would be the time you would have to expect that it would take when you try and bridge something through Snowbridge?
Yeah, so let's talk about latency. I think latency is interesting because it's where there are some trade-offs that are made. So because Snowbridge uses light clients, that means we need to wait for blockchain consensus, and blockchains are slow. They take time. They are dangerous to confirm immediately. Often you need to wait for a certain amount of confirmations before you can really trust that they are finalized. And so we are kind of constrained by these properties of blockchains. And so when it comes to latency, going from Ethereum to Polkadot, we need to wait for a certain amount of confirmations. And that's Ethereum's consensus time. And so I think it's about 10 to 15 minutes that it can take for a transfer from Ethereum to Polkadot. Similarly, when going from the Polkadot to Ethereum direction, we've got this beefy protocol that the Polkadot validators run that produce proofs for our bridge. And it's a similar kind of time window, 10 to 20 minutes. I can double check the latest. I think this is an area that we're going to make some optimizations to, but that's kind of the base case. And so it is slower than, multi-sig bridge, because in a multi-sig bridge, you just need to wait for those 5 people or however many it is to sign the message, and you're not kind of dependent on any underlying consensus system. And so that is one of the trade-offs. Having said that, I think there are solutions to this trade-off that we want to explore in future. I think, and obviously this wasn't a successful project, but the Nomad bridge, which was live last year, did a really interesting design where their underlying bridge had a slow, optimistic layer, but then on top, they used simple atomic swaps for bridging. And so what that means is, I think they used a protocol called Connext at the time for atomic swaps, where when you think about bridging, I think there's 2 different ways to think about moving an asset over. Let's think about the first time that Ethereum's ever sent over. There's no Ethereum in the Polkadot ecosystem, and so I need to send 5 Ethereum across from Ethereum to Polkadot. I go using the bridge, I wait 20 minutes, and now the Ethereum's been created. But now, let's say you want to come later on and send 1 Ethereum across. You could go through that same process where it's like a 20-minute process that you wait for your Ethereum to get sent across. Or you could come to me and say, hey, I'll just swap you 1 Ethereum. And so you could give me 1 Ethereum on Ethereum, and I give you 1 Ethereum on Polkadot. And that's what we call an atomic swap, where you can basically instantly get your Ethereum across from Ethereum to Polkadot, because you don't actually need to go through the bridge. You can go through a simpler atomic swap protocol for that. And so I think Connext is an example of one. I know in the Ethereum ecosystem, there's a protocol called Hop that does this kind of thing. And we think that that's going to be a very valuable thing for us to integrate within the Polkadot ecosystem, because that brings essentially bridging times down to instants without any trade-offs or any kind of compromises. And so maybe like longer term, we expect that the underlying bridge will be used for kind of bigger liquidity providers and kind of any kind of bigger asset transfers that where there's not enough liquidity for these like instant atomic swaps. Whereas the average user, they'd be able to do an instant atomic swap without any kind of compromise on security or trust, because these atomic swaps can be done using smart contracts that don't take any kind of risks on the trust level. We're not going to have that, at launch. It will probably be kind of a longer term thing for us to integrate with. But I think like our vision is that we have kind of a longer term architecture where we don't compromise on trust in any way. And so we use Snowbridge as like the light client based bridge for the underlying transfer and messaging architecture. But then we have these kind of higher level services on top where people can have instant bridging and don't have to compromise on the UX either.
Right. That's interesting. And what about like cross-chain swaps? We had Squid on the show a few weeks ago. They use Axelar, and basically you do like a cross-chain swap. So you receive on a destination chain not the same asset or the wrap form of the asset. You receive the destination token that you choose, like for example Glimmer on Moonbeam or whatever. But obviously, like you said, this works based on the trust assumptions around Axelar, because Axelar is facilitating this message passing between the chains, and they have their own validators. But just the idea of a cross-chain swap, I don't know, is that something that would also work here? Just thinking about it, it feels kind of convenient to the user. So yeah, what do you think about this?
Yeah, no, I think cross-chain swaps are definitely like a critical feature for people to have. And we've got support in our bridge for arbitrary messaging. That'll probably be launched in a few weeks. And cross-chain swaps are like one example of how you would want to use arbitrary messaging, where similar to earlier, we were talking about upgrading the bridge so that you don't have to do 2-hop, but you can then do 1-hop. As part of that, you may want to have that 1-hop also do like a swap on one of the chains, whether it's swapping on Uniswap on the Ethereum side or swapping on, say, Hydra on the Polkadot side, where as part of your like single kind of interaction with the bridge, it does that swap as part of the process, and you've done a cross-chain swap using an AMM on one of the chains. And that's something we're going to support with Arbitrary Transact when that goes live soon. That is one way to do swaps. There's other ways to do swaps as well. You don't necessarily need to go through like an AMM protocol. There's some like if you look at CalSwap as an example that comes to mind on the Ethereum ecosystem, where CalSwap allows for people to directly almost OTC swap with each other. But if there's no liquidity, then it falls back to Uniswap as an AMM, and it routes your liquidity through Uniswap for the cross-chain swap. And I think something like that would be possible in the Polkadot ecosystem as well, where it's kind of analogous to the architecture I was describing before, where you've got like a slow mode and a fast mode for bridge transfers, where the slow mode goes through the light client based bridge. But if there's a liquidity provider that has spare liquidity, you can do a fast atomic swap. The same thing applies for cross-chain swaps, where you could have like slow atomic swaps, slow cross-chain swaps that actually go through the bridge and actually go through an AMM on either side of the bridge to the swap, or a fast that kind of goes at a layer above the bridge and just swaps directly with another liquidity provider. But the slow mode atomic swaps, slow mode cross-chain swaps are going to launch soon on our bridge with our support for arbitrary messaging and transact. The fast mode is something that I think we're looking to longer term, and I think I'd love to see a project like Squid, because I think Squid's in a good position to kind of implement this kind of fast layer, where instead of say just going through Axelar, maybe they can also do like direct OTC swaps between liquidity providers and explore those kinds of things.
Right.
So we'd have to kind of explore that further down the line.
Okay. Yeah, all right. So you've thought about that as well. I've seen other bridges have like a max value per transaction type of thing for bridging. I'm not maybe you know the exact motivation behind that. Maybe it's just to make sure that things work at a smaller scale first before you scale up. But is that something that you will do as well, or what would it look like for you?
Yeah, so I know a lot of bridges did that, like for their initial launch, where they wanted to have like an early group of testers to kind of test things out before scaling up. I think for us, that's something we considered at one point, and we had some discussion with the community and governance and like people involved. And the main thing with our bridge is like it was very critical for us to implement arbitrary messaging, where the kind of lower layer of our bridge is not specific to any kind of asset or even asset transfer. It's agnostic, and it's just a message passing layer. And so what that means is essentially with that message passing layer, we don't even know whether there's an asset being transferred or not. And so in theory, anyone could implement their own kind of asset transfer layer on top of our underlying message layer. And so it wouldn't actually be desirable for us to kind of restrict the message passing layer in any way because of that. And so we decided to due to that, not restrict the asset transfer layer either, because even if we put like a restriction on our asset transfer layer, it would be possible for another team or another user to kind of build a different asset transfer application that didn't have those restrictions. And so also kind of, I think like the ethos and philosophy of the bridge is to support arbitrary messaging, and so with launching that, we wanted to ensure that we empowered developers to be able to do any kind of cross-chain applications and cross-chain calls that they wanted without needing to impose restrictions that kind of limit what applications can do.
And if I'd be bridging ETH, for example, through Snowbridge, what would I receive on Asset Hub? Would it be then just like some like snowETH or something, or what?
Yeah, exactly. I think we still I think we've discussed what to actually name the thing. Some people have used the name SETH. I think at the time when we register the token, we may call it ETH. I think this is another question for the Polkadot community of like, how do they want to name things? So with Snowbridge going live, there'll be ETH coming from Snowbridge, but the ETH that's already there coming from Wormhole and XLR is not going anywhere. I'm sure on Hydra and a lot of these applications, they're just going to have multiple versions of ETH. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because these different assets are actually different. They have different trust assumptions in them. And so they have different risks involved. And so it's good to have them named differently because people should know that there's different risks involved in these different kinds of assets. Even though they look like they're the same asset, they have different risks. But on the other hand, it fragments liquidity, right? It means you need to have your liquidity split across different pools. It means when you're using a particular application, you may need to convert to get the right kind of ETH that you want. And so there's that trade-off there. Obviously, like from our standpoint, we hope that long-term the community sees like client-based bridges as like superior in every way to the other bridges, and that like we can all eventually converge to like client bridges, whether that's Snowbridge or whether that's the other bridges also upgrading to use like clients. And so then, longer term, we would like to think that you can just have one name because there's one security model and one kind of risk model that's the best one, and everyone's happy with that one, and then everything is fungible. But in the shorter term, and when we go live, they're going to have different names, and I think we're going to go with SETH or snowETH. It's still to be confirmed.
I think that's a huge development. You guys going live, it's been highly anticipated for a long time. But how will you try and make people aware? Because obviously they still have the optionality. Wormhole has been funded with, I don't know, hundreds of millions or whatever. They're well known, and they push the marketing message when they can. So on that front, how will you kind of compete?
I think that you're right. That's definitely a challenge for us because obviously we don't have kind of that kind of funding and marketing behind us. But I think most teams in the Polkadot community see the value in Snowbridge. And like from the parachains that we've talked to, the founders of different parachains, the people who are parodying the ecosystem, all see that like a light client-based bridge solves problems for the Polkadot ecosystem that these other bridges bring in. And so we've got, I think, strong support from the core teams. I think that's also one of the reasons why launching as a public good project as part of Bridge Hub was essential for Snowbridge, because if we had some other token or governance system or our own parachain, then we'd be losing that key component of like being aligned with Polkadot's trust and incentive model. And that's something that I think helps us stand out from these other projects, and that we kind of are already seeing other teams are excited to kind of have a different trust model. In addition to that, we are planning for kind of integrations with various parachains on day one. We're working with all of the top parachain teams to kind of have Snowbridge assets integrated into their parachain and into their applications. And so in terms of like business development, that's in place. Obviously, that's not direct marketing to the public, but I think the best way to do that is to go through the different parachain teams, because the public uses applications, and it's the same for our philosophy on like our UI for bridging that I mentioned earlier, where like the public, they want to use applications, they don't want and use cases, and so for us to work together with those teams to help promote it is how we think about doing it. We have talked about potentially a liquidity mining program. I know we've also seen recently there have been a lot of proposals going through. I think Hydra and Stellar Swap have been talking about and have succeeded in proposals for like liquidity mining programs. And so we've talked with them about Snowbridge assets being included in those, and as well as potentially doing our own liquidity mining program, especially I think like maybe a month or two after launch, after everything is really stable and in place. And we've got some usage, that it may make sense for us to kick off something like that. But yeah, we're not kind of ready to talk about any specifics there yet.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. And also, I think it should be a push from within, sort of like that it becomes well known. Oh, you want to bridge into Polkadot, kind of use Snowbridge, or that becomes sort of the recommendation that people hear when they want to come into the eco.
And it's not something that's going to happen instantaneously. Obviously, people are cautious, and rightfully so, they should be. So we hope, like, over time, we want to open the gates for people to use Snowbridge immediately, but over time, we hope that we'll see kind of convergence and see some of these standards get adopted across all of the parachains.
Yeah. I think the integration into wallets would also be a really interesting thing that you mentioned. That would be helpful. On that note, like, what's your hope basically for what Snowbridge will achieve for itself, but also kind of like for the Polkadot ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, I think our real hope is that the Polkadot ecosystem maintains its like ethos of like the Polkadot relay chain providing security to all of the different parachains, and that we don't compromise on that. And so, like, my ideal hope is that all bridging and interoperability in the Polkadot ecosystem moves towards light client-based interoperability. That's not to say it has to be Snowbridge. If Axelar or Wormhole, pivot into a light client-based bridging, that's also awesome. And that really upgrades security for everyone in the Polkadot ecosystem. And similarly, I think this idea of bridging being a public good and a public infrastructure, I think, is important, specifically because it's directly tied to security. By having, I think other bridges that have a token, the problem is that token is a governance token. And so that means it allows the token holders to change the bridge and upgrade the bridge. And any kind of upgradability or governance that isn't based on the DOT token, even if the entire bridge was, like light client based and decentralized and trustless like ours is, the fact that there's this vector of change and upgradability that can occur through a separate governance system that's not Polkadot's governance is also a kind of risk. And so, like, we really hope that for critical infrastructure like bridging, we'll see like evolution, so that the Polkadot ecosystem is not vulnerable to like outside governance in that kind of way. And I think lastly, most importantly, is like, we're launching Snowfork ourselves as a team is launching the bridge initially, but it's being launched as a public good on a public good parachain. And so, we hope to see the project itself also evolve as a public good, where there's other parties that start to become involved in running infrastructure, in the governance and the evolution of the bridge, and that it grows as an open source public good project that's not just one team that's kind of running things. And I think we've really like designed our bridge to be able to evolve in that direction very easily. It requires minimal effort to run a relayer, and there's no trust or permission involved in the relays. Relays can get hacked, and it doesn't affect the bridge. And so, seeing over the coming months, the like full relay infrastructure of the bridge also becoming part of the public good is what we hope for.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's an exciting time for bridges. It's been something people have been waiting on. There's also other projects working on it in the Polkadot ecosystem, such as Hyperbridge. We had them on the show before. What's your take on that? Are you different in some ways? I believe it's not a common good project like yours. There's differences, but I think trust minimization is a big topic there as well.
Yeah, I think Hyperbridge is the like Polytope Labs project, right? So, and I think what they're exploring is quite interesting as well. I think last I spoke, they were exploring like a zero knowledge based design and building out zero knowledge based light clients. And I think that is also still like a promising direction for interoperability to evolve. I think it's still light client. As long as it's still light client based, whether that light client is implemented in native, substrate code like in our bridge, or implemented within a zero knowledge system, it's still a light client, under the hood, and that's kind of the key property that I think is important for bridges. And so I think there's also some benefits that could come from zero knowledge bridges. Specifically, they can be cheaper because they use less gas, depending on what kind of zero knowledge technology is used for them. The challenge is they're a lot more difficult. They're a lot more like frontier, and they kind of, I believe, are going to take much longer to get to the point of reliability and security and functionality to bridge to kind of do full consensus. I think consensus is quite a complicated process. But I think they are a promising direction that like we should be pushing on and like the Polkadot ecosystem should be exploring irrespective. The other kind of technology that we see becoming relevant in the kind of longer term future is BLS signatures and signature aggregation. So currently, instead of having to verify proof of stake and verify the signatures of multiple different stakers, we think that they can be aggregated into like BLS signatures, so that it's just a single signature can be used to verify. And that is also kind of a cost saving mechanism that will make bridges cheaper in the future. But yeah, excited to see like how Hyperbridge evolves longer term. I think the one challenge is that anytime there's a governance or upgrade mechanism that's not the same as Polkadot's governance and upgrade mechanism, whether it's a token or whatever it is, then that starts to introduce kind of mixed incentives into the mix. And so I'm not sure how they're going to go about kind of that challenge. But the underlying kind of goals of building different kinds of light client based bridges, I think is great.
Right. Lovely. Well, we'll be following you guys closely in the coming weeks. Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for putting all these topics into perspective. I learned a lot today, and it was nice that you could distill kind of these technical topics down in a nice way. Gave some high-level overviews.
Hopefully I wasn't rambling on for too long and losing you.
No. Well, you didn't lose me. Is there any last words you have, and perhaps pointing people to websites that we will put in the show notes as well? Yeah,
so I think our website UI will be app.snowbridge.network, and our docs will be docs.snowbridge.network. I think in the show notes you can put the links there. And similarly, I think we are always looking for feedback from users. You can ping Snowfork on Twitter. We've also got an Element channel. I'll share all the links with you that you can add to kind of the show notes that people can look at once we release it.
Lovely, sweet. Thank you for coming on the show, Aiden.
Thanks, and thanks for hosting.